The world is waking up, and you finding your way here today is no coincidence. The spirit world always has a way of guiding us where we most need to be at the absolute perfect time. I'm your host, Lindsay Morlock, and you're listening to the Guided Podcast, where we explore how the spirit world works on our behalf to guide us along our paths. This is where you'll learn how to live a life that is both conscious and connected, so you can supercharge your pathway to healing and open to life's magic and miracles. Come along this journey to see how guided you truly are. Hello again and welcome back. As we wrap up 2022 and move into the new year, I've been feeling guided to talk about bringing our dreams to life, because truly everything you want in your life, every dream, every desire, it's all on the other side of what your mind believes is possible. And usually deep down, somewhere within you, you just know that what you want is possible. But sometimes it can feel so hard to get there and to even see the possibilities, no less create the circumstances that support those dreams and desires. So I wanted to start off today by posing a question. Where do you argue for your limitations in your life? Let me say that again. Where are you arguing for your limitations? You see, our souls are so expansive, and so we are limitless beings. But the challenge of Earth School is that we live in a world that does nothing but impose rules and regulations and limitations of all sorts on it. And to layer onto this, our minds love making sense of information by compartmentalizing and putting things into neat little categories or boxes. So we might perceive lack or limitation within ourselves or in our society even, but we are truly limitless beings. So I wanted to start this conversation today in this way because it's important to understand our limitless nature, because most of us are disconnected from it. What happens when we dream, for example, of winning the lottery? While I'm sure there are some people going, heck yeah, that could happen, I'm sure there's a far greater number of us going, probably not. I don't know that that's going to happen for me. But what we believe in relation to the things that we desire is really important in the creation process. And to expand on that a bit more, if everything we desire is truly possible, and if the spiritual principle is true that where there is a desire, a path has already been created to that desire, essentially, absolutely everything we want, as long as it's aligned with our soul's reason for incarnating, is possible. But one of our challenges as humans with this comes down to our belief systems. Our beliefs, both conscious and unconscious, are always creating our reality. In fact, science tells us that 95% of our beliefs are subconscious. So that means we are only consciously aware of about 5% of our beliefs, and the majority of our behavior each and every day is basically being driven from our subconscious programming that formed primarily between the ages of 0 and 7. So that's a lot of unconscious programming running the show behind the scenes from our formative years. So what does this have to do with anything? Well, our beliefs are always creating our realities, both positive or negative. And for purposes of today's conversation, let's stick to the beliefs around the things that we're trying to create in our lives, our dreams, our desires, because as the new year approaches, many of us are going to find ourselves reflecting upon the past year and thinking about what we want moving forward. So our beliefs are an important part of this process because many of us are focused on what we want, but we tend to be equally focused or even maybe more focused on the fact that whatever it is that we do want, we don't yet have. So that means that we're having thoughts about our desires, which can be both helpful and unhelpful to the creation process, especially depending on where the scales tip related to our focus. So if you're familiar with Esther Hicks, she channels a conglomerate of entities known as Abraham. And I want to share an example that Abraham always refers to because it really helps paint a strong picture of what I think happens with our beliefs when we have a desire. I'm summarizing here, but the way Abraham paints the picture of how our thoughts or beliefs create our reality is by using the imagery of two train engines moving in opposing directions. So picture one train engine pointing left and picture the second train engine pointing right. On the engine pointing to the left, let's say that the engine carries the energy of your desire or your dream. And then let's say that the engine facing to the right, this engine is going to continue contain all the beliefs that you have that are somehow contrary or opposing your desires. So let's use a real life example here. Since a number of people like to recommit to health and wellness starting January 1st every year, let's just use that as an example because it's an easy one. And let's say that you have a goal to lose weight in the new year. And let's be honest, there are so many ways that you could achieve that goal. Diets, cleanses, exercising, so many possibilities, right? But let's say one engine of the train carries the energy of your desire to lose weight. January 1st hits. You're feeling motivated and you're fueling your body with nutritious food. You're going to the gym. And let's say over the course of a week, you start to feel really good and strong, and your motivation and positive energy around your commitment and your progress helps carry the engine of your desire forward. But let's say like 3 weeks into the month, you get invited to a party and you decide to reward yourself, as you should, with some cocktails and party food, that type of food where you have one of those moments where you're like, I don't care what that meme says, but there are definitely foods that taste just as good as skinny feels. You know what I'm talking about, right? So you indulge, and then you wake up the next morning feeling hungover, tired, questioning why you gave in to the temptation while watching all of the hard work of the last 3 weeks just fly right out the window. Maybe guilt washes over you in the moment. But one thing is for sure, none of it even matters because you're too hungover to really care. So you go to a diner to eat a big greasy breakfast so that your stomach feels a bit better from that hangover, and you decide you're going to worry about getting back on track on Monday. Now, for some people, this might not be a big deal at all, right? Because everything in moderation. They can give their body time that it needs to rest and recoup and get right back on the bandwagon the next day, or maybe even the next meal for that matter. But for anyone that has been down this road before and or has some sort of subconscious programs driving their train, this is where that train engine moving against your desires can start picking up momentum if we aren't aware of how our patterns are driving that behavior in the first place. So maybe thoughts like, well, I already got off the program, so I'm just going to keep eating whatever I want until Monday. Then I'll get back on track. Patterns that drive all or nothing thinking. I fell prey to that one regularly, and it's a form of self-sabotage. It makes us believe that there is either perfect or imperfect, but nothing in between. And it's a total setup for failure. And so rather than seeing the pattern or patterns for what they are, if we allow that to gain momentum, it might lead us to give up. So that train moving in the opposite direction of our desires is often laced with those subconscious patterns and beliefs. Subconscious patterns like self-sabotage or excuses that lead to beliefs of why you can't or won't achieve your desires that lead to abandoning them altogether. They all need to be looked at. But this is what I mean when I ask you, where are you arguing for your limitations? And by the way, I'm not immune to any of this. I'm talking about it because I know it all too well. I've lived in a space for years where I've argued for my limitations. And I really believed the stories that I was telling myself. I argued for the limited thinking of my very rational yet ego-driven mind. Our minds may sound rational at times, which gets confusing because sometimes our limitations don't seem like limits on the surface. They just sound like we're being reasonable, responsible, sensible. However, what I've learned about living a guided life is that when we are living from a truly intuitive space, I promise you, the decisions I make don't always make sense to my rational mind. Let me give you a very real and current example of that. I recently moved to Arizona from New Jersey, and in planning for the holidays, I noticed that every time I went online to book my plane ticket home for the holidays, I noticed that I felt hesitant to hit that purchase button. And there was no logical or rational reason for me not to go back east for the holidays. I just noticed that every time I went online to purchase my ticket, I hesitated. My mind didn't have a lot of stories or reasons as to why. It definitely wanted them, but I didn't have any. So it was easier to just pay attention to that feeling of hesitation that I was noticing. And this is one of the ways that spirit guides us, through our feelings and through our feeling body. And my hesitation was an intuitive message from my soul. Now, there's a time in my life where I would have just plowed right through that hesitation hesitation, I would have steamrolled right over the feeling and just booked a ticket. But the part of me that is more sensitive and conscious now to how I'm feeling, to what I'm feeling, before I take any kind of action in my life, I now notice these subtleties. And in this case, the subtlety was a hesitation. So instead of booking the ticket, I pulled back and I pulled out my pendulum and a deck of oracle cards, and I started getting information from my spirit guides to help me understand what the message of hesitation was trying to communicate to me, to try to understand why I wasn't being guided to buy a ticket. Because the truth is, if I wasn't going to be seeing my family for the holidays, I really wanted to be able to give them a logical reason as to why. But the other truth about the spirit world is that they're going to give you the information you need, not necessarily the information you want. And the message I received had to do with following and trusting my inner knowing, trusting the hesitation to not book the ticket, and some additional information about how I would need to rest during the holidays. So it didn't totally make sense to me, but I knew I was being asked to trust the feeling in my body. And I'll be honest, my ego mind was not satisfied with that answer and wanted to find all sorts of reasons why this would be the case to help me make sense of it. But a rationale that would actually appease my mind never came. So fast forward to the week before Christmas, and sure enough, I come down with COVID. So did the spirit world know that I would be down for the count during the holidays? I honestly have no idea, but I would imagine the answer is yes. But getting the guidance in advance and following that intuitive hit, even though I didn't know the reason why, saved me the expense of a plane ticket, and it also prevented me from getting my family or anyone else during travel sick in the process. And it also forced me to clear a lot of things off my work plate in order to take care of my health. So I share this with you only as an example of how our intuition is rarely rational, and yet our minds, which the vast majority of us are using to navigate our lives, pose significant challenges to us on our respective journeys, especially when it comes to creating what we most want in our lives. So whether we're on a weight loss journey and find ourselves worrying about whether our metabolism works well enough to get the weight off, or whether we have the self-discipline to eat only certain foods or to go to the gym regularly, or whether we engage in self-sabotaging behaviors, the mind is at play here. And the mind's job is to keep us safe. And I equate the term safe with the concept of familiarity or staying stuck right where you are. That's what's safe to the mind. Even if we don't like our realities, the familiar always feels safer than the unfamiliar. You see, the ego mind is our lower mind, and its job is to keep us feeling safe, sane, and secure in the world. And when our safety, our security, or our sanity is ever threatened, it's usually because of some wound within us that gets triggered. Our mind goes on in protection of our inner child. So by the time your mind is on, you can be sure that some wound within you, no matter how big or little that might be, got activated in some way. And the ego goes on because it thinks it's protecting you. And there's a number of different ways that the ego goes on to protect us, but one of the ways it protects us is by arguing for our limitations. Because if the mind can keep us stuck, we don't move forward towards what we want. And when we argue for our limitations, one of the things that can happen is it can leave us feeling powerless to change our circumstances. Now, when I speak of powerlessness, I like to refer to a definition I use when I'm doing hand readings for people. It refers to this feeling of stuckness or helplessness. It would be seen or felt if you felt like things were happening to you, if you felt victimized by your circumstances, kind of like that feeling of, why is this happening to me again? It's that feeling of being totally overwhelmed or paralyzed by your circumstances, and maybe feeling like your tires are just spinning in the mud, but you aren't really getting anywhere. And one of the biggest indicators of feeling powerless is if you find yourself in some sort of narrative where you hear yourself saying, I can't do this, I can't do that, or I can't because of this, I can't because of that. There is always a way, even if you can't see it, but arguing for why you can't is a sure sign of being in that powerless mode. And when I call people out on that, they're like, but I'm just telling you how it is. I'm just telling you the truth of the situation. This is just my reality. And while I totally understand that it's the truth they're living in that moment, it doesn't have to stay that way way unless you continue to argue for that limitation. But it's often hard to see the possibilities because our minds are so limited in their thinking that they can't even begin to dream up how a problem could be solved. And when our minds are the thing creating the problems in the first place, the mind is certainly not the source of the solution or possibility. And change is always possible. Everything can always change because everything in life is impermanent. And honestly, thank goodness that life is that way. Spirit can work these miracles into our lives in ways that our minds are way too limited to dream up. I've seen it happen time and again in my own life. But when we are in a place of feeling powerless, of being focused on why we can't have the things we want or why we won't ever be able to create a certain feeling or desire, think of it like those negative beliefs fueling the engine down the wrong track and pulling the engine holding your desires right along that track with it. And then we say, see, nothing changes, nothing gets better. But it takes work, especially for the things that we really want. So if you're rolling your eyes because you're not interested in having to work hard for what you want, stick with me here because it doesn't have to be hard. It just takes consciousness and connection to spirit in order to make that change. Because as much as the law of attraction touts the power of positive thinking, that's not the full picture. We can't truly achieve our desires until we are a vibrational match for the things that we want. And if we want something and ask spirit to create something and then counteract those desires or that ask with tremendous disbelief, our focus is in the wrong place and it ends up being like we never asked for it at all. And the other question we need to ask ourselves is, where is our intention coming from? Is our intention pure in that it's coming from a very heart-centered place and for the highest and best of your soul's evolution? Or is your desire an ego-based one? It's important to understand the difference. So let me explain the difference using the weight loss example. For those of you who might set the intention to lose weight in the new year, what is driving that desire? What is your motivation behind wanting to lose the weight? Is it because you want to support your overall health and well-being? Or is it because you feel the need to look a certain way as a function of all the garbage society projects upon us in terms of how we should look or how we should dress or what we should be or who we should be? Losing weight because you have a desire to nourish your body and support your overall health and well-being would be coming from a very loving and heart-centered place, because our bodies are the vehicle that carry our souls through this lifetime. So it's important that we care for them. So this would be a heart-centered intention. On the other hand, if you're wanting to lose weight simply because you feel the need to fit into a certain mold or to feel good enough in some way, your desire is actually being motivated by your ego's fears. So it's important to take a look at your intentions and especially the motivations underlying those intentions to understand where they're coming from, that heart space or an egoic one. So it's not uncommon for our mind to interfere with our desires. And as you will hear in an upcoming episode, when I was dreaming of leaving my corporate job and wanting to make a big cross-country move, it took me 4 years to make all of that happen. Now, during that time, if I had listened to my mind, and trust me, it was tempting, but I would have just packed up all my stuff, moved across the country, rented a place in Sedona, all while working remotely for my corporate job. But that's not the direction that Spirit gave me. In fact, leaving my job and making that move across the country looked nothing like the way my mind would have scripted it. And yet, they both turned out even better than I could have imagined. So the spirit world's job is to get you where you most want to go, the most prepared you can possibly be for the journey. It doesn't serve us or spirit to get the things that we want before we're truly ready to receive them. Because when we do, we somehow end up resisting our dreams, whether we reject what's being offered to us or, through self-sabotaging or not recognizing it when we get it or not even holding on to it because we weren't really ready for it. So while patience is definitely not one of my virtues, I do trust that Spirit knows how to get me where I want to be, fully prepared and ready to receive it. It's like, have you ever seen that show about people who win the lottery? And have you ever noticed that there are a significant number of people on that show who end up right back where they started, or sometimes even worse off? And it's because there are subconscious beliefs driving changing their behavior that cause them to self-sabotage and not hold on to the money. And the reasons driving the sabotage might be different, but ultimately it's these unconscious programs lurking beneath the surface driving the behavior. So anytime we're in a position of desiring in our lives, it's really helpful to notice if you're arguing for your limitations or you're arguing for your dreams, because where you're fighting for your limitations is where your healing work can begin. And here's the good news. I don't really believe that we need to dig up all of the skeletons in our closet or go dredging up the past to find all the reasons why we are the way we are. And the reason we don't need to go digging is because Spirit is going to plop whatever you need to look at right in your lap on a little silver platter the moment you need to look at it. So you don't need to go searching for it, because when you're ready to heal it, Spirit will make it crystal clear. And you can set some powerful intentions around this as well. One of my favorite intentions to set with Spirit when I'm moving through my own healing and I might need some help, I say, Spirit, please help me to see whatever I need to see around this issue clearly. And then I let it go, knowing that what I need to be shown will be shown to me in the way that I best can receive it. Our intentions are so powerful, and the bigger our dreams and desires, sometimes the bigger the resistance we experience in trying to bring them to life. So we can partner with the spirit world to best help guide the process of healing and creating what we most want. We don't need to go it alone. So to come back to the example of transitioning out of my corporate career into self-employment, I was arguing for my limitations left and right initially. And it sounded like, well, I'm single. I don't have a backup plan. I don't have anyone else supporting me. This is all on me, right? Other entrepreneurs probably have a partner or a spouse that can help support them. I don't have any evidence of that, but I certainly was convinced that I was right in my beliefs. You know, I used to say things like, well, I have to be bringing in predictable income monthly before I make this leap. It would be irresponsible to make the leap without that. I can't make the leap without certainty. Or I used to question, well, I won't be able to have access to health insurance. I won't have a 401k. And as I reflect back on these things now, I can almost laugh at my thoughts, because absolutely none of these things mattered when I ended up leaving my corporate job. And they certainly weren't good reasons to stay in an unfulfilling role. But at the same time, they held a lot of weight for me. And the possibility of not having these things that made me feel safe in the world, felt terrifying. And you know what? A lot of people that I shared these fears and beliefs with told me I was just being responsible by thinking about all of these things in advance. And sure, while there's a certain amount of planning and preparation that goes into a transition, people who shared scarcity beliefs like I did encouraged and supported my own limited thinking. So it was tough to go against the grain and leave my very steady income for the unknown and for more uncertainty. But because I made sure I followed Spirit's guidance and took the steps they were guiding me to take when I needed to take them, as opposed to what my mind would have had me do, which was stay put and do nothing, I was actually able to make the change. I have no doubt that if I were not living this guided life, I would still be in my corporate job, arguing for my limitations and terrified to make the leap. And my mind would find plenty of evidence to support my fears as valid reasons for not living my dream. Your mind is always going to go out in search of all the evidence it needs to prove itself right. So was it scary to make the leap? Yeah. But because of how Spirit moved me through it, there was a net to catch me when I finally did it. And that doesn't mean that the new territory didn't bring with it a whole new slew of challenges. But I have no doubt that I made the right decision and that Spirit moved me exactly where I needed to be in the way that I could best manage it. And I have been fully supported in bringing that dream to life every step of the way. So I'm not going to lie and tell you that our very rational minds don't tell us stuff all the time that is so believable. And I'm also not saying that we don't have material needs that need to be accounted for, because we do. But what I do hope you take away from this conversation is that it's worth challenging your limiting beliefs. It's worth questioning why you believe the things you do and whether or not they're even true. And it's also worth noticing where your beliefs are in direct conflict to your desires, because that's where the healing work can really begin. And it doesn't have to be a long slog. There are beliefs I have shifted instantly the minute I realized I had them and saw them for the lies that I was telling myself. And then there were bigger limiting beliefs generally associated with fears that I held on to so firmly that it took longer for me to work through. But when we take the time to notice what we believe and question it, we get to stand in our power. We get to make a choice about what we want to believe, about what is really true and what's merely a belief that has been projected on us by someone or something outside of us. So, what are a few things you can do to help dismantle these limiting beliefs and partner with Spirit to help yourself with the healing process? Well, one of the things that's really helped me to dismantle limiting beliefs is a process known as the work from Byon Katie. And I'll include her information in the show notes. But you can literally Google this, and there are 4 guiding questions that you answer regarding any belief that you hold. And the first question is always something like, is this true? And the second question is whether or not you can absolutely be certain that it's true. And it's really helpful when we're believing our mind stories. That process of challenging what we believe through these steps, it's really simple, but very powerful. So that's one quick and easy way. Oftentimes our limiting beliefs are our mind's way of protecting us and keeping us safe and stuck. So it's really important to honor and process any emotions that you might be feeling and processing them through your physical body. And when I say feel your feelings, I mean where in your physical body are you noticing any sensation of the emotion? So for example, what is the sensation of fear feel like for you, or the sensation of anger? For me, I feel fear as this like ball or rock in my stomach. So what is the physical sensation of the emotion that you're experiencing? And from there, we can move that emotion through our physical body by directing our attention to the discomfort and allowing our breath into that space to release it. And if you're trying to bypass your feelings and move right into positive thinking, it's just that. It's bypassing, and it never works. So it's best to really honor and validate what you're feeling so your heart feels heard and understood. That whole saying, like, feel the fear and do it anyway, most people interpret that as push past the fear and take unaligned action. And that's not what we're going for. You really need to feel the fear. You need to feel whatever you're feeling. Feel the physical sensation of fear in your body or of whatever emotion you're noticing and release it. Our feelings are not good, bad, right, or wrong. They are just intuitive messages from our soul. And so when we feel and release them in the physical body and understand the message Spirit is trying to send us with it, we move through it, we release it. So validate your right to feel whatever it is that you feel. It makes sense that you would feel the way that you do. You've got deep programming playing out, so honor it, validate it, but it doesn't have to own you. Being aligned with what we want is really important. And so feeling your feelings and getting back into a place of alignment is a really important part of the creation process. Another thing I would encourage you to do is really look at your intentions and the motivations behind your intentions. Is it a heart-centered intention or is it an ego-driven intention like we talked about earlier? It's really important to understand the difference. And another thing you can do is you can create a list of all the times that everything in your life worked out for you, even if you couldn't see how that was going to happen at the time. I love that one, and I feel like it's so helpful to buoy my faith and my trust in something greater than myself. And last but certainly not least, pay attention to your focus. This is where a meditation practice can be helpful because it boosts our focus. Sometimes it's hard to focus on what we want as opposed to what is right now. But as Spirit likes to remind me, what is not what will be. So keep your attention focused on where you want to go. Challenge the beliefs in the process, throwing roadblocks your way so that no matter where you are on your journey, no matter what you are looking to create in this new year, set your dreams big and then notice where those limiting beliefs might be holding you back from what you most desire. And until next time, I'll leave you with this. If what you desire is for your soul's highest and best, a pathway there is already created. And I promise it's always worth the work and healing within yourself to remember just how powerful and limitless you truly are. Thank you so much for listening to the Guided Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be so grateful if you would share it with a friend or even leave me a review so we can ensure that it makes its way into the ears of listeners who need to hear these messages most. Until next time, may you remember how guided you truly are.